detail international condemnation of the Houthi execution crime of 9 innocent people last Saturday. United Nations and USA special envoys to Yemen meet the Omani foreign minister in Muscat to discuss peace in Yemen. The joint forces take up fierce clashes with Houthi rebels in different fronts in Hodeidah. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swedem. The European Union condemned the execution of 9 people, including a minor, by the Houthi rebels in Sana'a last Saturday. The European Union urged all parties in Yemen to cooperate with the United Nations to ensure justice for all. Meanwhile, the French ambassador to Yemen condemned the execution carried out by the Houthi rebels. He confirmed that the violations committed in Sana'a are against human rights. More details on this story is within this report.
The Iranian-backed Houthi militia on Saturday publicly executed 9 civilians by firing squad. Hundreds of people, mostly Houthis and their supporters, attended the execution in Tahrir Square in the rebel-held capital of Sana'a. Rights organizations called upon the rebels to stop these death orders. Some activists described them as an execution for the whole Tehama, the place which has been subject to historical, political, and social discrimination over years. A Yemeni writer said that the execution of 9 innocent people from Hodeidah after being kidnapped from their houses is a horrible crime perpetrated by the Houthis. The 9 were among more than 60 people the Houthis accused of involvement in the targeted killing of Saleh al-Samad in April 2018. They were charged with spying for the Saudi-led coalition, which has been waging war against the rebels for years in an effort to bring back Yemen's internationally recognized government to power. The 9, including a 17-year-old boy, were arrested months after al-Samad's killing over allegations that they were involved in the killing of the official in an airstrike more than 3 years ago. They were held for months in undisclosed places where they suffered inhumane treatment. The United Nations, the United States, and the United Kingdom on Sunday condemned the executions of the 9 Yemenis. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the trial in which the 9 were convicted and sentenced to death did not meet the requirements of fair trial in due process. Stephanie Dujarric, the spokesperson for the UN chief, said the Secretary General strongly condemned these terrorist acts, which are a result of judicial proceedings that do not abide with basic requirements of fair trial and international law. Also, he has urged all actors to cease the violence and to engage in peace without preconditions as to reach a comprehensive settlement. Rebel leader Muhammad Ali al-Houthi, head of the Houthi Supreme Revolutionary Council, tweeted that they have rejected the UN's challenge to the rebel-controlled judiciary. The US's top diplomat in Yemen, Kathy Wesley, called the trial sham after years of torture and abuse of the executed people. This outrageous action is another example of the Houthi indifference to basic human rights. This barbarism must end, Wesley said in a message posted on the embassy's Twitter account. The British embassy in Yemen also condemned the brutal Houthi execution, which showed blatant disregard for a fair trial and due process. Yemen has been embroiled in a civil war since 2014, when the Houthis swept across much of the north and seized the capital Sana'a, forcing the internationally recognized government into exile. The Saudi-led coalition entered the war the following year on the side of the government. This stalemated conflict has killed more than 130,000 people and spawned the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The Houthis do not have anything to give the people in Yemen but death in all its shapes. Death in the war fronts, death from hunger, execution without trial or through politicized ones.
Houthi rebels are descendants from the Imami rulers who used to control Yemen in the 60s of the last century, before being uprooted in a blitz revolution. They want to revive back their Imami ruling in Yemen in a time of civilization. A deeper look at Houthi sectarian nature is on this report.
Their dream is imposed on everyone in Yemen. The Houthi rebels are trying to revive back the rule upon people. For that end, they subject the whole country to a ruthless war that devours Yemen. The Houthis have their own way of thinking that is related to ultra-dogmatic beliefs, which center on the claim that they are related to the family of the Prophet Muhammad. From this particular point, all the conflict in Yemen can be summarized. In the early 90s of the past century, the seeds of the group became clear. They formed the movement that was so-called Al-Shabab al-Mu'min, or the believing youth. This group voiced complaints of a claimed marginalization in which Zaidi people in Yemen were living in. Zaidi people are those who claim that their family tree extends back to one of the Prophet's grandson. Their dogmatic thinking can be said to be a Shiite one, but in a simpler form. Their slogans were political. The Yemeni state then was flexible in dealing with them. Their leader Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi was a parliamentarian in 1993. After 2001 attacks in the United States and the American occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, Al-Shabab al-Mu'min movement began to grow. The movement had new rule, a politicized one. Their opposition to the rule of late President Ali Abdullah Saleh was clear. The political agenda of the Houthis turned into an armed one in 2004, the same year during which their leader Hussein al-Houthi was killed. Abdul Malik al-Houthi, his younger brother, took the helm of the rebellion, and the movement named itself Ansarullah, or the supporters of God. Through 6 years up to 2010, the Houthis engaged in wars with late leader Saleh's government. The chance came to their doorstep when revolutionary protesters marched during the Arab Spring. In 2014, Houthis drove their way to the capital Sana'a and controlled the state's institutions. They are now moving on to capture the strategic governorate of Ma'rib to ensure their dominance of the entire country. However, by heroes of Yemeni resistance, Houthis are kept out, and the dream of the thriving Yemen is still in the horizon.
Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi affirmed his country's full support to end the war in Yemen. This came during a meeting between the Omani Foreign Minister and the UN envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg. During the meeting, the two parties exchanged views on efforts to secure a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire by all parties in Yemen, facilitating the flow of humanitarian supplies and entering into a political process that achieves the goals of the Yemeni people. The Omani Foreign Minister also met with Tim Linder-King, U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen. The two sides affirmed their commitment to revive the political talks and work for ensuring peace to all Yemenis. Abu al-Qarrar al-Nahari, a prominent Houthi official, was shot dead by the joint forces in clashes south of Hodeidah Governorate. Sources reported that the Houthi leader was killed in clashes erupted after the rebels tried to penetrate the fronts of the Fazza and Jabaliyah in Tuhaita district. Sources confirmed that a group of Houthi militants were also killed during those clashes. Still in Hodeidah, fierce fighting between joint forces and Houthi rebels took place while rebels were trying to penetrate a number of fronts. Meanwhile, movements of the militia in the direction of Zabid were spotted and dealt with properly. The government forces thwarted an attack by the Houthi militia in Malahid in Saada. A military source reported that the government forces fought back groups of the Houthi militia who launched a massive attack on their positions. The source confirmed that violent confrontations ended with the killing and wounding of a number of Houthi elements. Massam project in Yemen has demined 4,030 minefields and unexploded devices since the beginning of September. With this, the total number of mines dismantled by Massam project since its start in 275 is 275 mines and unexploded devices. To Al-Dala, Houthi militia continues a mobilizing campaign to celebrate the anniversary of its military coup against the Republican regime. Houthi militia obliged tribesmen to choose between joining their ranks of its fighters or pay donations. The militia takes advantage of sectarian occasions to launch massive campaigns to levy money from people, especially opponents. Houthi rebels launched yesterday a massive tax campaign in Al-Sadda and Al-Nadra districts it governed. Local sources confirmed that this campaign was launched under the excuse of supporting the anniversary of the Houthi military coup against the legitimate government in 2014. The campaign targeted toll collection offices, government departments, and the private sector. Sources indicated that the militia demanded also employees in government departments under its control to donate for its annual event while forcing retailers to allocate funds to revive the event. Coming next, Yemeni students abroad continue to suffer amid irregular grant payments.
ثالثتي على منطقة الروضة استهدف الأطفال الأبرياء اللي يلعبوا في الشارع يدعي للسلام يقولوا للسلام يقتل أطفالنا يقاتل أطفالنا الأبرياء.
أنا قلت افتجعت ولا أقول معي واحد صاروخ ثاني طلعت البيت حقنا عشان ألعب أنا وأصحابي والصاروخ الطرح.
Welcome back. In recent years, the conditions of students abroad have worsened. Sit-ins and vigils have escalated due to the delay to pay their financial dues, which has affected their educational aspect and their family stability, especially those who are accompanied by their families. The following report sheds more on this topic.
The Yemeni authorities allocate $13 million every 3 months for students on scholarships in 32 countries around the world. A bachelor's student receives $1,800 every 3 months, compared to $2,100 for a master's or a PhD student. The allowances for Yemeni students were not delayed more than a week or two until 2014, according to the documentation of the investigation prepared by reviewing remittance data issued by the Yemeni Ministry of Finance. However, since mid-2015, the delays gradually increased, reaching 1 month and then up to 6 months in 2017. The General Union of Yemeni Students Abroad intends to launch a new phase of open sit-ins in protest against the Ministry of Higher Education's irregularity in dispersing students' financial dues. This comes as a protest against the irregularity of the Ministry of Higher Education in the legitimate government in dispersing financial dues to students over the past 5 years and its impact on the progress of their educational process. Yemeni students sent to study in Egypt launched an open sit-in at the Yemeni Cultural Attaché in Cairo. During their sit-in, the students accused the student unions of slackening in their role because of the partisan loyalties of the minister, they said. They called on all Yemeni students on scholarships abroad to move towards embassies and cultural attachés and to launch open sit-ins early next week until the leadership of the Ministry of Higher Education is dismissed and held accountable, and competent people are appointed who are able to take responsibility and propose appropriate solutions for the regular payment of their dues. Students suffer from double disadvantage: the continuous delay in the arrival of living allowances, as well as the interruption of university fees for 204 male and female students, who are threatened with expulsion due to the late arrival of fees from their countries. That's to say, about a third of the scholarships in Jordan. The Jordanian government is funding the studies of 383 Yemeni students under the Cultural Exchange Protocol. What students fear most is the expulsion from university housing or from rented homes due to the delay in the quarterly living allowances every 3 months. If they do not receive subsidies to pay the rent when they cannot go back to university housing, where do these students go? To the street?
United Nations humanitarian coordinator in Aden condemned the targeting of the Makha port, describing it as a brutal attack. The UN official was briefed on the damage caused to the port and the destruction of relief aid as a result of the Houthi attack early last week. This came during a meeting between the UN official and the foreign relations official in the national resistance in the western coast. The UN official thanked the national resistance and the joint forces for their efforts in facilitating the relief work. Makha port has received a commercial ship carrying generators for the city's power station. The shipment was provided by the leader of the national resistance, Brigadier General Tariq Muhammad Abdullah Saleh. The generators were transferred from the port to the power plant in the city of Makha amid joy among the citizens. Houthi blocks information about COVID-19 in their controlled areas. This leads to the spread of mass suffering among people due to the false information on the pandemic. More on the following report.
There was a big wave of COVID-19, and the Houthis knew that very well, said a UN health official in Yemen, who chose to speak in an anonymous way, of fear of undermining negotiations with the rebels on vaccinations and other issues. Isolation centers were full. The numbers were double 3 or 4 times. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the Houthis have not treated it with seriousness and action. The Houthi rebels continue to block information about the dangers of COVID-19, especially in their places under their control, including the capital Sana'a. They keep spreading false information about the virus. The Houthis continue holding public events including recruitment, gatherings, and funerals, attended by thousands for senior military officials killed in a battle. As virus cases spike, all are held with no precautionary measures against the virus. Over a dozen doctors, aid workers, and residents said cases in the north are rising rapidly, with more frequent funerals, apparently because of virus victims, though doctors said they've been warned not to confirm the cases of deaths. All spoke anonymously for fear of retaliation from the rebels. They even hindered international efforts to help fight it in their areas. Dr. Adham Ismail, the World Health Organization representative in Yemen, said it was a big achievement to get any coronavirus vaccine in Houthi-controlled areas. Intentionally, authorities banned the shots and then agreed to allow in only 1,000 doses. They have not held any campaigns encouraging people to get vaccinated. The Houthis' opposition to vaccines forced doctors and other residents to seek their shots in Yemen government-held areas. Many, including aid workers working in Houthi-held areas, registered online and traveled secretly to cities like Aden, Lahj, and Taiz for vaccination. Yemen received its first 360,000 dose shipment of the AstraZeneca vaccine from the United Nations. The shipment was the first batch of 1.9 million doses that Yemen is to receive through the end of the year. A vaccination campaign was launched in the government-held areas in April. Yemen's internationally recognized government has reported around 7,200 confirmed cases, including 1,391 deaths in areas under its control. The actual numbers, however, are believed much higher, mainly because of limited testing. Houthis are pretending that COVID-19 does not exist, which only lead to more mass suffering. And what can the people do behind the Houthis' guilty actions?
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 51 new cases of COVID-19. Also, 6 deaths were recorded, plus 24 recovered cases. The total cases are 8,718, including 1,649 deaths. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Wide-scale international condemnation of the Houthi execution crime of 9 innocent people last Saturday. United Nations and USA Special Envoys to Yemen meet the Omani Foreign Minister in Muscat to discuss peace in Yemen. The joint forces take up fierce clashes with Houthi rebels in different fronts in Hodeidah. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching. See you soon.